Hi, everybody. I am Max at Books on the Park here, and it is our pleasure to host Atsuro Riley. I just want to read a brief introduction and bio for him and remind you to buy books. Books are at the front of the store where they can be purchased, and Atsuro is going to sign copies, yes, at this desk back here where my colleague Carr is. So please keep your masks on. We're going to give Atsuro the grace to have his removed while he's reading. So please keep yours on. And I'm going to introduce him now. Atsuro Riley is the author of Heard-Hoard, winner of the Alice Faye de Castagnola Award from Poetry Society of America, and Romy's Order, which was the recipient of the Whiting Writers Award, the Kate Tufts Discovery Award, the Believer Poetry Award, and the Witter Benner Award from the Library of Congress. His work has been honored with the Lannan Foundation Literary Fellowship, the Pushcart Prize, and the Wood Prize given by Poetry Magazine. And we are here tonight to celebrate his newest book, Heard-Hoard, which is a finalist for the PEN America Literary Award. Brought up in South Carolina, Low Country, Riley lives in San Francisco. Please join me in welcoming Atsuro Riley.
Thank you, Max, and thank you, Carr, and welcome to everybody here and everybody who's joining us on Zoom. It's wonderful to be here at our local, our neighborhood bookstore. I live just on the other side of the park in the Presidio, and indeed we have one of the habitat restoration people here from the Presidio here in the audience. I thought I'd read some poems from the new book. As Max said, the book is called Heard-Hoard, and you're probably wondering what's with that title. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the title. So Heard-Hoard is a little play on the ancient concept of a word hoard, or a storehouse, a repository of vocabulary. Seamus Heaney called it a strong room of vocabulary, of words and images, and in my case, broadening it out to Heard-Hoard, stories, phrases, songs, etc. Seamus Heaney even had in one of his poems, there's a little, and this might be helpful to you, a little line that goes, lie down in the word hoard, burrow the coil and gleam of your furrowed brain. This is the part I love. Trust the feel of what nubbed treasure your hands have known. So it's a really advanced bit of thinking there, because he's talking about, of course, something in language, and then immediately, as Seamus Heaney would do, turns it into something tactile and concrete and something you hold with your hands. Trust the nubbed treasure of what your hands have known. That's really beautiful to me. So Heard-Hoard. So we're in the land of the rudimental, we're in the land of the originary, we're in the land of the radical. So a radical, you'll remember from your high school botany, is the forming, the embryonic part of the root of the plant. So it's just coming up out of the seed, and everything that is later to be the plant is prefigured in that little radical. So that's the world we're in, and the book is really concerned then with herds. And herds are very much like words, and they're made of words. Herds, that would be mainly in this book, tales which one has heard and then accumulated, and which form a person, form your soul, and the things upon which you draw. So I thought I'd read the opening poem, which is a kind of a great curtain opener, and it's really great when you convene people like this in a circle to hear somebody saying something. I was reminded today, I found some little notes that I'd made many, many, many years ago when I started thinking about this book. There's a writer called Edouard Glissant, who's a beautiful writer, writes in French. And I stole a little, just a little snatch out of one of his books, and it was really the radical for this book and for this poem, this opening poem in particular. And I'm going to read you that quote. So, we are speaking now of the circle drawn around the storyteller by the shadows of night. On the borders of this ring, the children who will relay the word are beside themselves. Their bodies are hot with the fever of day. Their eyes grow larger in this time that does not go by. These children understand nothing of the formulas, nor do they catch all the illusions. But the man with the stories speaks to them first. He is quick to guess when they will shiver wide-mouthed in terror or laugh to cover up their fear. His voice comes from beyond the seas, and it draws the trembling children into its womb. So that was really the radical or the seed for this poem. Now, in this poem, I'm going to use the term brink, which in my part of South Carolina is what we call the riverbank. There are quotations in here, which are the little seeds or beginnings of stories, and then there are little bits and snatches of stories that the storyman speaks, and I'll try to inflect in a way that you'll understand that those are quotations. And then we have a little homonym situation, tale, T-A-L-E, and tail as in a cattail, T-A-I-L. Oh, and I should also say, we talk about the storyman here as Glissant talked about the man who tells the stories. It could, of course, as we very well know, could be a story woman, but then that would involve an extra syllable and it wouldn't work in the poem. So, call. It starts with the lamp that lamped our night, our dirt. Calls of this ware-balded red mud ring going glow. The old ever voice with the tear through it, intonating, rivering. Souls and appetites from holler, brink, and gully, lured and drawn. The story man encircling us, binding us by lard torch and ditty. So, in the beginning, and it came to pass, wait till I tell. Tail flicker from his crackling throat, blackening kerosene cattail held high. Some say what you gripped right then wasn't vine, but bull snake. Hadn't they clung tooth and claw to branch and bark? When the creek bend child got beat, got hided fresh, his mama broke her switch. Damned if dog daisies, beanstalks didn't fank up in the spokes. Our pulse, our crescendo timbrous amphiglade of bug chirp, burgeon. What was it green as this ever? Bright breath of the lamp that lamps our night, our dirt. So now we're off into the land of these tales, and here's a very simple tale of two brothers. It resembles old tales that you have known from childhood. And it begins, and there are several poems in the book that have to do with brothers, and this is one of them. And this poem begins with them skipping rocks. It's called Sunder. A last rock skip hurl storm, crazing river blasts, the closest they ever were. In right lock stitch, snared and split some fire supper, cooked on sticks. By dawn, the older brother took to chucking what bottle frags he could find and crud oysters across. The high-pitched younger blacked our waters with a yowl. Lord, the sound such as rose from him, carried so, carved into us, clings. Hadn't they clung tooth and claw to branch and bark? Came a man and truck to take them off. Dieseled those boys off away, some say somewhere's up country, inland. Where it was they landed, why? Nobody, not them, knows. Nobody, not them, knows just how they humped and grubbled home, what road they'd graved, what woods crisscrossed, which creeks, which trains they'd hopped, who helped. Came safe home, sure, but blank as houses. Came safe home as him and him as evermore, not them. So this next poem, this next tale is really a kind of a dramatic monologue. So a woman is telling her story. It wears a little head note. There's a earlier poem in the book in which some boys are taken to a place called Candy Stop up Highway 52. So this wears a little head note that says Candy Stop up Highway 52. And it's called Moth. Gristly, G-R-I-S-T-L-Y, is, you know, the nastier bits of the meat. There's a fun little reference in here to a jazz band, and that jazz band it's a kind of a secret cameo appearance by a real jazz band, which was called the Jenkins Orphanage Jazz Band, which was made up of children in the Jenkins Orphanage in North Charleston, South Carolina. It's just down the way from where I grew up. And they were a very famous band and went on to many of the kind of jazz greats whose names you would recognize came out of the Jenkins Orphanage Band. They performed at presidential inaugurations. They traveled to Europe. It was quite a thing. And they had a little nickname, and their nickname was Them Lambs. So, Moth. I've been candy since I came here young. My born name keeps, but I don't say. To her, who my mama was, I was pure millstone, cumbrance. Child ain't but a toe sack full of bane. Well, I lit out right quick, hitched and so forth, legged it, was rid. Ackaby at first, then thicket hid, then Wadmalaw, out to Nash's meat yard, Obie's juke. At county home, they had this jazz horn, drumbeat, orphan band, them lambs. They let me bide and listen. This gristly man, he came, he buttered me, then took me off, swore I was surely something, let me ride in back. Something, snared, spat on thing, being more like moresoever what he meant. No, I'd never sound what brunts he called me, what he done, had I 100 mouths. How his mouth repeats on me down the years, everlastingly riveled looking like rot fruit, Wasn't it runched up like a grub? First chance I inched off back through bindweed, I was gone. Nothing wrong with gone as a place for living, whereby a spore eats air when she has to, where I fairly much clung for peace. Came the day I came here young, I mothed myself, I cleaved apart. A soul can hide like moth on bark. My born name keeps, but I don't say. So this next poem, it really came out of a sad thought that I had, and I wrote down on a little card, and the card just said, his mother told him no stories. And then I started to think about that. It's a terrible thought and a hard one to even bear in mind. And so I think I outsourced. Therefore, I outsourced that painful thought to someone other than a human speaker. So this poem is called Creek Throat, and I tend to think about 90% of the time that it's being spoken by an actual creek. So in this poem, we make use of that term I mentioned before, the radical, as, you know, again, the embryonic part of the forming root of a plant, but also the embryonic, rudimental, originary part of anything. Let's see. There's a lovely phrase in here, the rocky breasts forever, which comes from Elizabeth Bishop. And I'm happy to be able to use that in the poem. You'll hear the word succor, S-U-C-C-O-R. And epiphytes, you'll remember from your high school botany, are the air plants. Spanish moss is a really good example of an epiphyte from my part of the country. Also from my part of the country are cypress knees. Some people in California don't know what cypress knees are. So swamp cypresses in particular grow these roots that stick up out of the water, almost like, is it stalactites or stalagmites? That kind of poke up as opposed to hanging down. But anyway, they poke up like knees up out of the water, and they're kind of knobbly looking. So in a creek or a swamp, you're going to see these cypress knees. And then radical, R-A-D-I-C-L-E, is the radical that we're talking about and the one we're interested in. Okay, that's it. So this poem is called Creek Throat. Oh, sorry, one last thing. This also has a little head note, and this has a little head note that just says, "We seen his mama, she dry and scant." So the poem is called Creek Throat. By hook or by bent, I guttle the rudimental stories. I'm all in scoop, suck, and swallow by dint of birth, of shape. Were you hollow nursed on river source upon a time, or the rocky breasts forever? I was not. I learned to lie in want for succor food, for forms. I gaped, I gulped for what I got. Nowadays, to need, to come by what comes by here comes natural and needs no bait. Just steep, dead still as a black snake creek and wait. I choke some weeds, my crook, my lack, my epiphytes, my cypress knees. This old appetite is chronic as tides. On foot or by boat by night, please come slake me with radical stories. So this next poem takes place in the kind of subjunctive imaginary. So as you heard in Sunder, there are two brothers floating about in this atmosphere that came home and were quite silent or blank. And this poem imagines two brothers, maybe the same brothers, I don't know, maybe not, but imagines two brothers that are thinking about what it would be like if they could speak, or in the terms of the poem, thinking about what it might be like if they could sing and what might be possible if they could. So it has a little head note, and that head note is, but that brace of brothers pleached a song. So pleaching is really a kind of braiding or interweaving, and it's often done with trees. So a tree on this side of the path and a tree on that side of the path, and they kind of grow up together, literally grow up together. So two become one and form a kind of lovely thing. So that's that image. There is an old word in the poem, and that's crudel. And let's say that is the kind of low, faint music of birds like doves, to crudel like a dove, to coo as a dove. And then what else? So the poem is in two parts. There's a little introduction telling you kind of what we're all about and to kind of get us started, a little flint. And then there's this song itself. And in the song itself, we hear the word gibbet, which is a gallows. There are lots of snakes in here. So spoiler alert for people who are, trigger alert for people who are triggered by snakes. There are lots of different names of snakes. So you're going to hear the word punct, P-U-N-C-T, as in to puncture, as a verb. There's a wonderful bit of folklore. I don't know if it's true or not, a bit of zoological folklore from where I come from, that if you get bit by a snapping turtle, he won't let you go until lightning and thunder come. So you have to kind of get used to him hanging around. So this is duet. Had we a braid reed voice, our good throats restored, our lock-stitch cord, we would crudel keen, could breathe, our lodged, our locked unsaids, duet our not thought knowns. That this fear axe weighs caustic on the walls of the mind, that it gibbet looms over us, gleam breathing, pendulating, all the time fixing to fall. That a body gets, the soul gets, fostered same by beauty, sure by fear. That sure as fangs a threat pestered, sheeny cottonmouth gon' gape. That this whip shape underfoot in pine straw, more a diamondback turned flinchy. That the leaf crenching, cold coiled copperheads will spring. That once upon a switchblade spring, a man of cruddy truck coerced us off. That the annals, they will show how young and green. That a snapping turtle's jaw beak puncts you like a bear trap, stay sunk in meat till lightning. That some are bent to hunt to use a thing or eat or crush it since they can. That we ourselves would kick dent and axe batter any innocent flank of galvanized for noise. Anyhow, trust the skinny scent hounds to backtrack more or less their track to home exactly. That our mother salt saves food for the end of the world. You're really doing okay. Do you want to come and sit down? So this next poem is quite straightforward. It's unfortunately will be quite familiar to you, having lived in the culture in which we all have lived the last these many years. And I'd like to say that this poem is completely obsolete, but alas, I think it's an old story that is a new and present story. And it's called Stranger. They would congregate right regular in the dirt lot of the First Baptist or along by that abattoir off the Brack Creek. The hot meat of the matter being to parse patch what they'd heard of what she was. Marrow-wise, what she was to them was foreign-faced, not natural, not from here. Of no known rhizomatic strain, nor kith, nor kin. Word said and word had spread, she's some flotsam from that load of those what flooded here by boat. Say they bought some bait from off her cart. How they'd pincer snatch their change like she was hot. Pink dew worms I got, fish eyes and roaches, live minnows for cheap, chicken neck gristle, no crickets. Her uncreased neck, her every body part, their snack. Theirs to eyeball eat and memorize, to judge, to pass from each to each, from mouth to ear. Have you smelled the hair on her? Have you bagged a feel of leg? Would you could always put a bag on her. Why she all the time banshee and bent down, dawn sweeping her dirt? Possessed by slingstone, fireball bags of shit, they torched her yard. Wouldn't they congregate right regular? By time and ire, her rent house formed a skin of dunk and char. So, let's see. I was quite taken. Many years ago, I saw a recording of Seamus Heaney, and he was talking about how, of course, he had been writing poetry since he was a young man, and now he was in his 50s, and he was talking about how he finally learned to admit what he called marvels, admit marvels into his poetry, to notice the good. And he even wrote a poem, which I won't read to you the whole thing, but I'll just read the one little part where he gets at this. And then, of course, in the latter part of his career, in the latter part of his working life, he began to incorporate this kind of thinking. So the ending of this poem, Fosterling, goes, heaviness of being and poetry sluggish in the doldrums of what happens. Me waiting until I was nearly 50 to credit marvels, like the tree clock of tin cans the tinkers made. So long for air to brighten, time to be dazzled, and the heart to lighten. So there's so much that's incredible in that, not least the tree clock of tin cans the tinkers made. It's the most incredible sounding little contraption, isn't it? Anyway, crediting marvels. So I made a poem called Goldtown, and again, you could take your pick here. This could be a hound or it could be a person. You know, where I'm from, people are called certain dirty things, or they might be called a money hound or a gossip hound or some other kind of hound, and you could fill in all the various things that could be. So this is a gold hound. So it might be an actual gold hound, but it could be someone looking for gold. And in this case, the gold are the marbles that we're talking about. And the master here could be our man Seamus, giving this advice. And so again, this is a poem. It's a quite long poem. It spreads out over many pages in the book. I won't read the whole thing. I'll just read some little snippets of it. But it begins with a little, just like duet, it begins with a little kind of intro lyric, and then it goes on. And I'll select a few bits. So the little intro lyric goes, "The old master, kneeling, mastered me, gave good and goad, would hie me forth, unsnicked my choke chain, sicked me loose. Go bird dog you some marvels." And then, so one of the sections of marvels is called cottage work. Along the weed embrangling snuffle path down through 8 Mile, the narrows, the pure isness of necessity carrying on. Off this horse trailer hid by copper vines, you can buy yourself a pussy or a pecker, picture of which you want, the only question, or how many. Razor exacted out of magazines, tendered neat in baggies or waxed paper, clean as stamps. This long grove here you can pick from, a ripe olio of vacated wasp houses hung like lamps. Revivals on offer in this glow field, eternally open, flushed with loud painted Jesus fluent gourds. Word says renting that stripped wood A-frame yonder is a new woman nobody knows. How she'll scald and scour out quick all your bringings in her bathtub, your miles of pig guts for the chitlin strut, the piney supper, bundled spruce as laundry. And there behind Greenhaven, the Murtises will sell you a word for curse or for cure, or they'll salt some through your letters. Mr. W being known for fine carving these stern pine paddles, fresh hewn for use by fathers, known to sear, to scar. Under the last love legs of this cinder bridge, the boat lady, name of Zindi, floats and hoards. The original wood boat, what brung her, evermore propagating here like spatterdock. New boatlit rooms as her need grows, slapdashed out of scrap, lashed together another unto another. Don't we all of us reckon Zindi harbors one kind of everything on her hodgepodge shelves, be it seed pod or radical or shark's tooth, dry slough skin or chasmal rib cage or jaw. Come look, do I look like I'm needing your cash monies? Be it barter something or browse. Right. So this next poem, there's a little bit of setup that's helpful for you, but it's one of the ones that's in the book that I like the most. So the basic frame, the kind of frame of the tale here is the boys are hanging around and they keep eyeing this place and they're quite drawn to it. And they're like many things that we're drawn to, they're drawn to it and they're afraid of it. They fear it and they can't wait to get in there. And so it develops all kind of magical properties. There are 3 refrains. Oh, and then while they're there, they eventually do get in and they meet a transformational figure. So that's the kind of basic frame. There are 3 refrains throughout the poem. They all go something like, and there are various quotations and all that, but this refrain begins something like, and then the word shrapped comes from war. We're talking about a war veteran here, so shrapped comes from shrapnel. And then you may already know from your high school biology that a plexus, like your solar plexus, is a complex of interwoven things. And that's all. It goes by quite quickly. Oh, last thing. In one of the refrains, we hear about the concept of root room. So root room comes from a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins, and it's in one of the terrible sonnets, and he's really having a tough time. The speaker is having a tough time, and at one point he takes himself in hand and says, come on, pal, leave comfort root room, let joy sighs. Leave thoughts a while, leave comfort root room, let joy sighs. So give yourself a break. So this poem has a little head note from Wallace Stevens, and the head note goes, the exactest element for us in which we pronounce joy like a word of our own. Element. Well, we'd heard it to be veiny with Cottonmouth, I'm not going to lie. For true, the sheer snake electric back beyond of the place put a pull on us like a magnet. That rag rope flagged, barred the path, just egged us on. To go and skulk and sidle learn, to palp and tap the edge, to crack us in. What did we feel there once we crossed? Veritable thought-thick trunks of swamp-foot oaks. Something like a shift in the structure of experience. Here was Johnny Pep, shrapped home from war, branch dragging, agglomerating discards and disjecta. His craving wove a plexus, more a house from limbs and leaves. He knit us in. He left us be. He let us watch. He watched us try to climb, to ape his crisscross weave, to pitch, to plait the roof. Something like, y'all stray boys welcome to be welcome if you work. Didn't we work? Particular night hoots and near chromatic whistle riffs in echo. Beast likenesses or bugs he whittled live from hickory, showed us how. He'd let us watch him strip and shave the shag bark to taste, to read, to mull the grain. Something like root room, I reckon. Something like when Johnny Pep hitched home from war, we took to carving, curing scraplings into shapes. So we're going to finish up here. couple more poems. So one of the things that you get if you read the book is that you get little intimations that there's a father crisis or a dearth of reliable fathers, and you may have picked that up even from the boys in there hanging around Johnny Pep. So this poem really gets at that in particular. Now, the main character in this poem will end up speaking eventually, and hopefully you'll be able to tell by my inflection when that happens. But, pluff mud is a kind of black, flatulent, stinky mud that we have in the South Carolina low country. Right, so this is called oak. We were all of us empty of its heft, and Tammy could tell. Being she herself was wildly loose strife weed, undaddied, same as us. Flung chaff motes that we were. She saw to tell us time and time that yonder oak, its bark and bulk. She harped on it. She rendered, instilled, elucidated treeness, piece by part. Have I said yet, howsoever she'd have told us, it was never it to her, but him. As in, I school myself, I climb the bluff, I follow, feel the roots of him. They river-bound, they gnarling up from mud, black pluff. He veins the bank. Some say, word was that her fleet-blooded actual daddy jacked the toll through, humped the trains. She dwelled on it. She brooded, elaborated, fleshed for us, especially much his arms. How one mossy bronze span she favored had been scathed, engraved along its length by lightning. How the long-muscled, strict, striated river hanging over one would hold. You could loop a rope there near about the bicep, wrap you up a wide horsehead knot to grip. To ride good, rid fear, let's not feature no black flow flowing down below. Cling strong till your hands numb, till your blood goes. Swing low. You could bellow, you could holler while you're at it, bending with you not to break. You could set yourself sway until kingdom come, till he hears you, till he weighs you. You could ring rightful like the tongue of a bell. And the last poem, mentions two characters that you haven't met tonight, but you'll meet in the book. And one is called Clary, and she is a figure who is seen kind of constantly perambulating around the community, pulling a cart, which she has made out of an oak trunk. And so she's mentioned, and then there's a boy called Tynan, and he's one of the boys who went to work tobacco and got dumped at Candy Stop. And so he has a little moment of respite in this poem. Lumen, you'll remember from the side of your light bulb boxes, is a measurement, a unit of light, but it also is the internal space, like in a vein or in a straw for that matter, or any sort of, or a cell there's the outside of the cell, and then the space in the middle is the lumen. Oh, and Yawpin is a kind of spiky sea holly, coastal holly that we have. When I say break, it's B-R-A-K-E. And this poem has a tiny little head note from a medieval Irish work. And that head note is, "It's juices that have greened my chin." And so this poem is called Thicket. We come gnawed by need on hands and knees, as a creature nosing, grubble seeks the spring. As bendy spined as bandy snakes through salt shrub, yawping, needle break. Fork darkling green, for thorns surround this absorbing, quaggy, crample ground of briar canes intervolved with kudzu mesh and mold. Of these convoluted vines we grasp to suck, to taste the pith, the lumen, the cell sap flux, to try to know some sour, sharp something about something. Lumen is as lumen does, a little room for turmoil to grow lucid in. Leaf wound in here, where Clary sets her carp tongue down and blinks and craves. In here where Tynan breathes. We grasp to suck, to taste what light. Let loose the bale that bows us down. Bow down. Thank you, everyone on Zoom, too.
Thank you, everybody. So we have copies of the book up front, and you can purchase it there. And then Atsuro is going to be at this desk right here, and happy to sign copies and hang out for a bit. So,
do we have a second to take any questions?
yeah, if you'd like to, or if you want to schmooze, or just
okay. If anybody has any questions, and I don't know if you guys are manning the chat, if anybody from Zoom has a question, I'm happy to talk about anything you want to talk about. Or not. Yes.
Well, you talk about the back beyond. I feel like that's another concept. What is the back beyond?
Well, the back beyond, I mean, yeah, I guess my sense of it is when you live in a small place, you know, almost everything is the back beyond, which is to say out of your, beyond your kin, out of your imagining. So yeah, there are always, you know, and because both books touch upon childhood and draw upon childhood, it's a very strong concept in childhood that around that bend beyond which we're not allowed to go, or, you know, we lived on a river, and so there was a zone of the river which was really our river, but the river is quite big and then went out to the ocean, for Lord's sake, and there were parts of that we were not allowed. So past the trestle, we were not allowed to go, and of course it took on kind of magical dimensions, you know. And I feel like it's a back beyond, or the back of beyond, et cetera. It's a kind of old literary trope, isn't it? You know, from almost our childhood reading. That's how I imagine it. And, you know, in the first book, there's a poem called Film Strip where, you know, I mean, I almost think of it as almost a kind of burgeoning sexuality poem. And so back beyond is where the man is. It's kind of scary and exciting. And a lot of things could go wrong. Yes, Carl.
Why is this now at this time? There like something that was. I guess like why this was like what else?
Well, I had this, 10, 11, 12 years ago, as I was putting the finishing touches on the first book, which really was kind of, lots of people with their first book, they kind of deal with their birthright material as they understand it. So their kind of coming of age story or their childhood stories or whatever. And that was all kind of childhood material. And there were bits of things I was remembering. There were bits of things that I kind of thought about as I was making that book that didn't fit. That's one thing. And so those started to accumulate. And then as I started to see what was being accumulated there, I started to notice that, hey, these are all old tales that have been kind of rinsed clean over many, purified over many, many years, many tellings, many retellings, and so on. So it became and then I got this dream. I started to have this dream, not literally a dream, but like a vision, a wish that I could take this idea of word hoard, take this idea of a herd hoard, and what if there was a place where all of the things you ever heard and all of those wonderful stories that you got told, if you're lucky, by your mother and the other dear adults in your life, what if there was a place where all that stuff got accumulated, and what if you could do something with that? So, I started to become kind of obsessed with getting that done, and then, and then 11 years went by as I was doing that. And then, of course, the appetite comes with the eating, as they say. So as I got to do that, then each story would then beget another story, would beget another connection. The brothers then don't speak, so then it has to be thought about. What if they could speak, and what if they made music? What would that be? And so on. So everything led to another thing. I don't know, is that, yeah. Yes, Max.
I'm curious just about voices around you. Seems so conjured, and just how you hearing those in your head make it to paper to be, a heard word, maybe, but just if you could talk about that.
Yeah, it seems to me this incredible gift, that I've been given. That I grew up in a place where, we're not talking about lettered people, right? So, and in the South in general, the kind of common understanding about Southerners is that they love to tell a story and that there are great storytellers. Well, it is very true. And, I come on my daddy's side, I come from people who are either not literate or somewhat literate, or, kind of heading toward literate for 30 or 40 years. But boy, do they have stories, right? And so they, and there's a lot of kind of, there's a hierarchy, right? A hierarchy of the really amazing ones who say things in a way that really hook into you, the ones that can really make you laugh, and so on and so forth. So I feel that I was surrounded by, all of that, for one thing. The other thing is that I think growing up as the child of an immigrant. So my mother comes from Japan. She doesn't speak an English that you would understand as English necessarily. And so I did a lot of translating for her growing up, and a lot of kind of thinking about the world and translating it to her. And so that sensitivity to kind of the way people say things and the way my mother's English sounded to other people, I was very conscious of, obviously embarrassed about at certain points, certain vicious moments. I felt embarrassed by it. I felt sad about it. It was hilarious sometimes. It still is hilarious. And so, very aware of that. Also, I grew up in a very Black world. So my schooling was really in a Black environment, in an African-American environment. So that English and all of the wonderful creeks, right, and tributaries feeding in from that world, really kind of formed this, it's a really rich stew that I'm really, really happy to have. And so far, I still hear it. And you're right. I mean, I definitely do hear it. And I'm constantly taking the world that we live in here in San Francisco, California, which is a long way from home, and often translating it into, some funny way that we might have talked about that same thing back home. So it's a kind of constant process. I hope it doesn't go away. And I mean, sometimes you have to wake it up, right? So it's dormant, it's lying there. So sometimes back to the appetite comes with the eating. Sometimes you'll be in the poem and then you'll remember the exact way to say it based on something going way back, but you didn't know you knew. And then, of course, you remember, and then you think, well, of course, it's been there all along, but that you needed the poem to wake it up. But it's fun. Anybody else? Okay, that's enough of that. So we can sign and hang out, and thank you very much.